slew it. A right hand by Holyfield.
By Buster Douglas, look at this! He's knocked Mike Tyson down for the first time in his career!
But unfortunately, it'll never happen.
Front punches, and it's over!
I think it's going to be over.
Aguero in big trouble against the ropes.
I have to say there seems an element of genuine hate between these two, Ambrose.
For sure. I don't hate the man.
Just imagine if you bought a ticket. Stop it, Frank. You can stop it any time.
Castillo's in trouble! Weak steps in, and the fight is over!
Welcome back, fight fans, to another episode of Legendary Nights. We're back again for another great episode for our Legendary Nights series. We're really excited to bring this one to you. I'm sure by now you know what it is because you'll have seen it on social media. This is the tale of Sugar Ray Leonard and Tommy Hearns, their first and legendary encounter in the early 1980s. Johnston, this is a fight that goes down in history as one of them great endings to a fight. We've done a controversial ending with Chavez and Taylor, but this one is probably not so much controversial but more shocking because of the way the fight was going.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a terrific fight. I mean, it's a go-to fight. If nobody's seen it, I suggest you go onto YouTube and watch it. It's all there. The whole fight's there. You've got a documentary on it. It's brilliant. It really is. It's got everything. It's to and fro. 1 minute, one fighter's on top, then another one comes back. It's everything you would want from a legendary night with two legendary trainers and also, two legendary fighters. It's obviously, the main part of it, two legendary trainers. So it's got everything you need.
Absolutely. So as always, we're going to intertwine the careers of Sugar Ray Leonard and Tommy Hearns, but we're not going to start all the way at the beginning. We're going to go to 1978. It's going to be the starting year for us when they're relatively early into their professional careers, having both turned professional the year prior. So starting with Sugar Ray Leonard, he won a unanimous decision against, of all people, Dickie Eklund on July the 18th, 1978. Now, he knocked Eklund down in round 6 and 9 before, surprisingly, Ray hit the deck in the 10th. But the referee called it a slip. And for years, and for anybody who's seen the film The Fighter or has seen any interviews of Dickie Eklund, he bragged that he knocked Sugar Ray Leonard down, but later admitted that, no, I didn't knock him down. That was bullshit. He slipped. 2 days later, Tommy Hearns, in his career, he went to 10-0 with 10 knockouts when he knocked out Raul Aguirre in 2 rounds. The Mexican had hit the deck 3 times before the inevitable finish. On August the 3rd, 1978, back at the Olympia Stadium in Detroit, Hearns gained a successive second-round knockout against Eddie Marcel. Now, in the same month, ABC, the television network, offered Team Leonard a televised fight against Tommy Hearns. Now, at the time, Angelo Dundee was actually away on his holidays, and he was unreachable by phone. So, the promoter, the New England promoter, Dan Doyle, he agreed to a $100,000 fee for Sugar Ray Leonard, and Team Hearns accepted a fee of $12,500, which is ridiculous when you look at the difference between the two. But just before the contracts were signed and ABC announced the fight, Angelo Dundee managed to return from Florida and put a stop to it. His main reason for him putting a stop to this fight was that both fighters, as he said, will earn a much larger payday in a couple of years. And also because he knew that Hearns was capable of beating Ray. As we know now, that was certainly an excellent decision by Angelo Dundee.
It was, and we've mentioned it in Hearns' career profile, we've mentioned it in Sugar Ray Leonard's, so there is a bit more detail in both of those career profiles. But yeah, if you didn't know, yes, they were offered the fight, and it wasn't, Dundee was a shrewd guy. He knew the potential that both these guys had, and he knew that it was going to be millions for them to both be made later on in their careers, which, I mean, he was bang on, wasn't he? Brilliant decision. Now, with the Leonard fight now off the table, Thomas Hearns took a fight against his first ranked opponent, and that was Bruce Finch, and he actually knocked him out in three rounds in September 7, 1978 in his beloved Detroit. Now, 2 nights later, it was Leonard's chance to impress when he fought ABC's replacement fighter for Hearns, Floyd Mayweather Sr. Now, Leonard still did get his $100,000 as promised by ABC, and with that, he stopped Mayweather in the 10th round. Leonard went the 10-round distance a month later against Randy Shields, a fighter he knew only too well when he was actually outpointed by him in the 1973 National AAU Light Welterweight Championship as an amateur. In the fight, Leonard accidentally hit referee Tom Kelly with a left hook as Kelly was trying to separate both fighters in the 9th round, and he actually suffered a cut on his left eye, and he had to be replaced by the judge around at the time who was judging the fight, Harry Sisici. The fight ended an easy points win for Leonard, and the Associated Press reported there were no knockdowns, although Shields was reeling slightly under a furious attack in the final 30 seconds. A dominating display by Sugar Ray Leonard. Now, those within the Leonard camp were still reeling over Dundee's decision to not fight Hearns, so they decided to attend a fight with Thomas Hearns against Pedro Rojas on October 26th. Now, Dan Doyle was among those in attendance, and he said, "Those of us who opposed Angelo Dundee's position realised that we'd been wrong. A Leonard Hearns fight, when it happened, was going to be worth a lot of money." Now, Hearns was at his savage best, and he knocked out Rojas in the first round.
Now, Sugar Ray Leonard, he picked up 2 more victories in November when he outpointed Bernardo Prada and then stopped Armando Muniz, who had to retire in the 6th due to tendonitis in his left arm. Leonard pleased the Springfield, Massachusetts crowd when he displayed the Ali Shuffle well in the Civic Center ring. And on the same night of December the 9th, 1978, Tommy Hearns knocked out Rudy Barrow at the Cobo Arena in Detroit, Michigan. Both fighters ended the year undefeated. Hearns was 13-0 with 13 knockouts, and Ray Leonard was 17-0 with 10 knockouts. Hearns began 1979 with a 10th round stoppage of Clyde Gray on January the 11th at the Olympia in Detroit, and it wasn't all plain sailing. Gray was ranked number 2 in the world, and everybody said he was too much for Tommy at this stage of his career. They were probably right. He was a very seasoned fighter. Tommy had all knockouts up until then, and that night was the first time he didn't knock his opponent out right away. From the 5th round on, he was running out of gas. It was the first time in Hearns' career he'd gone past the 4th as an amateur and as a pro. By the 9th round, Gray was really coming on, and Tommy was looking tired. Before the 10th, I told him just to go out there and try to box, hoping we could win by decision. Now, he just looked at me and then went out there and knocked out Clyde Gray in the 10th. To me, that is the night when I knew I might have something sensational on my hands. And that's a great quote from the legendary, the late Emmanuel Stewart.
Yeah, it was a defining night, really, for Tommy Hearns, who hadn't really had the best of amateur careers. We weren't knocking people out like he was in the pros, that's for sure. And Emmanuel Stewart would clearly see this night was the night when he really come to the point of where we can actually see that this guy's really got something and he's going to become a world champion potentially. Now, Leonard's march towards the world title challenge was beginning to pick up some real momentum, and he fought 8 times in 9 months. And it started on the same night Hearns defeated Gray. But this time, this was at the Capitol Center in Landover, Maryland, which was 500 miles away. Now, Sugar Ray stopped the veteran of 58 pro fights, Johnny Gant, in the 8th round. And that was the next part of Leonard's. And then we jump again back to Tommy. Tommy continued his impressive knockout streak with an 8th round stoppage of his own against Sammy Ruckyard at the end of January. And in the following month, Leonard travelled to Miami Beach when he flattened another veteran of 60 pro fights, and that was the Canadian junior middleweight champion, who was Fernand Morchetti in round 8. Now, Morchetti's father actually spoke for him, Fernand Sr. They were French-speaking, so Morchetti didn't have the greatest of English, and he said it was the perfect shot. I think he, as in Leonard, should be the champion of the world. Now back to Tommy Hearns. And as I've just mentioned earlier, in 163 amateur bouts, Tommy Hearns had knocked out only 8 of his opponents. But in his 17th fight against Segundo Morello on March 3rd, 1979, he dispatched his 17th challenger inside the distance. 17 wins, 17 knockouts, and it was around this time that Emmanuel Stewart said this of Tommy. He said, Tommy's like a hitman. He does his business, then he gets out of town.
Yep, he certainly was a hitman, or the Motor City Cobra, as he was known up until that certain point. Yeah. Now, going back to Sugar Ray Leonard's career, he made his first fight in a 5-fight contract with ABC worth a staggering $1 million against Daniel Aldo Gonzalez on March the 24th, 1979, in one of 4 live fights televised by the ABC network over a 3-day period. Now, Larry Holmes defended his WBC title against Ozzy Oseo, and Ernie Shavers fought Ken Norton in a primetime doubleheader. The following afternoon, Leonard knocked out Gonzalez in 1 round, and Wilfred Benitez defended the WBC welterweight title against Harold Weston. So a great little weekend and a great little few fights over them 3 days. Yes, don't get that anymore in this day and age, do you? Really good headline fights there. Going back to Hearns then in his career, he went the 10-round distance for the first time in his professional career against Alfonso Heyman in Philadelphia on April the 3rd of 1979. The Associated Press reported, Hearns, 18-0 with 17 knockouts, won every round except the first by a wide margin, but he was unable to bring Heyman to the canvas, stopping his consecutive knockout streak. The hitman from Detroit surprised Heyman with short overhands rights and a quick jabs. Hearns emerged from the fight with 2 sore hands, and Stewart blamed the cheap-ass gloves.
And I believe the promoter that gave him that dished out the gloves for the fight, he didn't use them ever again after that as well. Again, the thing is with Leonard and with Hearns, if you ever try and follow their careers, they alternate all the time. They fight on the same nights and the same months. There's so many different fights, but so we're trying to keep it this way. So in April and May, Leonard, he won decisions over respectively Adolfo Vernon at the Dunes in Las Vegas and Marcus Geraldo at the Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Now, it was in the Geraldo fight that Leonard believes his detached retina began to cause him some problems. And this is something, again, we spoke about on his career profile in great length. But he did say, while I have no proof, I believe the problems with my detached retina, diagnosed 3 years later, originated from the damage from Geraldo. And it was a great shot that he landed on Leonard. And Leonard even said he was like seeing double vision. And he just started throwing punches at the one in the middle. It was like, he knew he was in a bad way, but he managed to survive, come through and win the fight. Now, in a strange twist of fate, Tommy Hearns actually stopped his guy, who was Harold Weston, on that same night of the Leonard Geraldo fight on May the 20th, 1979, at the Dunes in Vegas. So it was Leonard fought at the Baton Rouge in Louisiana. So he's fighting in Louisiana. Same night, Hearns is fighting in the Dunes in Vegas. Now, Hearns did win the first 4 rounds on all judges' scorecards when Weston actually rallied to win the next 2. So it was becoming a bit tight. Now, however, Weston's left eye was badly swollen and he was having trouble seeing out of his right eye, which he said was actually due to him being thumbed in the 4th, which apparently was true. It was accidental. Now, the fight was eventually stopped in the 6th and Weston was actually diagnosed with a detached retina in his right eye and never fought again.
Well, that's crazy, isn't it? The same night where Sugar Ray Leonard believes that his issues with his future detached retina began a few hundred or few thousand miles away or whatever it is geographically, and you've got Tommy Hearns fighting a guy who ends up getting a detached retina and never ends up fighting again. It's quite scary to think how parallel and how coincidence this was, that these things happened on the same night. Just
so strange.
It is. I find that really, really strange with these careers being so intertwined. You know, in June and August of that same year, both fought one bout each. Now Leonard, he forced Tony Schiavone to quit on his stool, and Hearns came through his own adversity against Bruce Curry. He was actually badly cut early on, and Stewart said that he was afraid they were going to stop it, but Hearns, he went to war, and he knocked out Curry in the third. Leonard then went on to stop Pete Ranzani on August the 12th, picking up the NABF welterweight title in the process. After the fight, Ray said, "Pete put up a hell of a fight, but he never hurt me, and he didn't throw any punches I wasn't ready for." Now Hearns cut and battered Incencio de la Rosa around the ring for 2 rounds before he said that he couldn't continue because the lotion that was put on his cuts got into his eyes. That must have absolutely stung. In September, Hearns collected another knockout against Jose Figueroa in Los Angeles, while Ray retained the NABF welterweight title with a first-round knockout of Andy Price on September the 28th. Hearns fought once in October of 1979, winning by yet another knockout. So, again, we talk about, when we do these legendary nights, how intertwined the careers are of the competitors that we're talking about in their fight. I don't think we've ever done one where it's been so intertwined as much as this.
No, normally you got someone that sort of starts their career and we're sort of able to get a big chunk of their career in before the next fight sort of comes into play. This is completely different. You know, if they're not fighting on the same night, you know, they're fighting a few weeks or a few nights from one another. And although they're in different places, what you'll find is you'll have one fighting in Vegas, the other fighting in Massachusetts, and then they're sort of switching venues. The only difference was that Sugar Ray Leonard was further ahead than Tommy Hearns, as we'll get to in a minute. Sugar Ray Leonard, speaking of the title, that's exactly what happened. Sugar Ray Leonard finally got his shot at Wilfred Benitez, who actually held the WBC welterweight title at the time, with the ring being added and putting their title on the line on November the 30th, 1979 at Caesars Palace in Paradise, Nevada. And of course, this is a fight we would love to do again for a legendary night. It's a terrific fight. And Leonard was at his superb best, and he won by a 15th round stoppage. Last round, and he put it on Benitez, and he got stopped. And you know, some people moaned about that. You know, should Benitez should he have continued? Well, after the fight, Angelo Dundee said, from a technical standpoint, there was more done in this fight than I've done for a long time. You saw 2 smart, scientific fighters, 2 champions in the ring at the same time. They brought the best out of each other. And speaking of whether it was a premature stoppage, Jim Jacobs, who was Benitez's co-manager at the time, also, I think Cuss was around trying to help Benitez out. He was up at camp when Benitez leaving his shit-stained towels about, getting kicked out from Cuss's manor. Well, he was the co-manager, Jim Jacobs, and he said, "I'm glad the referee, Carlos Padilla, stopped the fight. I didn't want the fight to get hurt." Sugar Ray Leonard, obviously completely over the moon. He actually turned around and said it was the biggest moment of his life. It was better than winning a gold medal. And he said he's a great champion. He's fought with a lot of spirit. And Wilfred Benitez accepted defeat gracefully, saying Sugar Ray is the best in the world now. I was happy to get a fight with him. He was a great challenger and will prove to be a great champion.
Very quickly, Ray, but right there is the camera. First, congratulations. Second, express your respect for Benitez.
Oh, Howard, I felt that he's a great champion. I knew he had a lot of experience, but I wanted the belt so bad. I'd like to take this time to thank all the sponsors of Sugar Ray Leonard. I'd like to extend a special prayer and console to the family of Mr. Willie Classen.
Did he ever hurt you?
Yes, he hit me with a good left hook. One time we butted heads and so like got me a little dazed, but I was so determined, Howard, really. This is the greatest moment of my life other than Montreal.
You realized in the 11th round you were devastating.
I knew I had to pull it out because I saw it was a dynamite fight between Hagler and Pio Anfermo. I know for a fact that the champion with a lot of class.
Did you think it was a close fight in your mind?
Well, I knew I had the edge. I felt I had control. A couple rounds I gave to him because he did show me that he had the experience of a great champion. But I tell you, I really feel great, and I can go home with the belt around my waist.
I wonder if he was wiping his ass on Costi Amato's towels at this point. I wonder if this was before or after he was wiping his ass on them towels.
That's what I'm thinking.
So for the benefit of anybody that may have not listened to our recent Cus D'Amato Career Profiles episode, there's a brilliant story in there about the time he took on Wilfred Benitez for a very short while as a fighter, and I'm definitely recommending that you go and listen to that episode, not just for the fact it's Cus D'Amato, but for the sole fact of the shit-stained towel story is one that'll stick with me for a very long time. So just going off in a bit of a tangent there, but it's Wilfred Benitez, man. We had to bring that up. Sugar Ray Leonard, Wilfred Benitez. Yeah, as you were saying earlier, it was a great fight to watch, and one that we've enjoyed briefly covering in the career profile of Sugar Ray Leonard as well. Now, with Sugar Ray picking up his first major title, Tommy Hearns continued to rise through the ranks, and he won a 10-round decision against Mike Colbert on the same night that Leonard beat Benitez at the Superdome in New Orleans, Louisiana. Now, he didn't return to the ring until the new year, February the 3rd, 1980 to be exact, knocking out Jim Richards in 3 and then stopping Angel Espada in March at the Joe Louis Arena in Detroit, winning the inaugural USBA welterweight title. He put the Puerto Rican down twice in the 3rd and once in the 4th. Now, at the end of March, Leonard, going back to his career, retained the WBC and the Ring welterweight titles with a stunning 4th-round knockout against Davey Boy Green. Now, it was a devastating left hook that put Green down for several minutes, and Ray said, "It was one punch that did it, and it was perhaps the most beautiful punch I ever threw. A short left hook coming from the body and rising to strike him flush right in the temple." Now, on the same night, ABC showed a split feed on telecast featuring the Leonard-Davey Boy Green fight. They also showed the Tommy Hearns knockout of Santiago Valdez in 1 round on the 31st of March 1980 at Caesars Palace. This fight was actually on the undercard of Larry Holmes versus Leroy Jones and Alexis Arguello versus Hayes. Tommy then faced another veteran who a few years earlier held the WBA junior middleweight title, and his name was Eddie Garzo. But again, he was no problem for Tommy Hearns. He ended the fight in a round.
Devastating. The former junior middleweight champion Eddie Garzo gets floored by Tommy Hearns in 1 round. It was Tommy Hearns as a fighter. I mean, you just watch the real tapes of him knocking guys out for fun, and the way he had that long reach. Such a tall guy at welterweight, 6'1", and that long range arms. When he landed that right hand, it was so much power on the end of that shot. Oh, it was just devastating. These guys were getting absolutely blazed out of the ring, and you could see why there was beginning to be a lot of hype now around Tommy Hearns. Now, in the summer of 1980, Sugar Ray Leonard lost for the first time in his career. He lost his first professional fight. He lost the WBC and the Ring welterweight titles against the legendary, the greatest lightweight that ever lived, Rebel Duran, in a fight that was dubbed the Brawl in Montreal. Now, of course, we keep doing this, Sean, but, you know, we've got a director to the legendary nights of the Brawl in Montreal between Rebel Duran and Sugar Ray Leonard. We do a nice little episode on that. If you want more details, go and have a listen back and give us your feedback. Let us know. It was an older one, wasn't it? I think we've done that last year. I think that was, wasn't it, Sean?
Maybe even before, yeah, very early on.
Maybe even before that. Yeah, it was very early on. So, yeah, a good one to go and listen back on. The time, though, finally arrived for Tommy Hearns. He wasn't that far behind Sugar Ray, but it was his time to step up to the plate and challenge for the WBA welterweight championship against Jose Cuevas on August 2nd, 1980. And this was at the Joe Louis Arena in Detroit. Lovely, in front of his crowd as well. He must have been so pumped for this fight. Well, it was probably one of the most brilliant performances from Tommy Hearns, and Cuevas just could not live up to those massive right hands. Now, if you don't know who Cuevas is, Cuevas was a fantastic puncher himself, knocking guys out for fun. Now, the one that ended the fight in the second, and it was only the second round this went to, you're talking about Cuevas, a top fighter at the time, demolishes him in 2 rounds, and that was it. The right hand was just simply tremendous, and nobody, I don't believe anybody that was on the end of that shot would have ever withstood that. Now, while still in the ring, Hearns quickly began to force his next fight and first defence, shouting, "Come on, Sugar, let's do it." He said this while pointing his finger at Sugar Ray Leonard, who was actually sitting at ringside for the bout. Hearns was now considered to be the number one in the welterweight division, even though Duran was the welterweight champion at the time, or had a version of the welterweight championship when he dethroned Sugar Ray Leonard in the brawl in Montreal. Now, Leonard later acknowledged that Hearns was a legitimate challenger, but he said in his own words, all I could do was smile and wave. I couldn't make any promises until I avenged my loss to Duran, and that was far from automatic. I respected Tommy Hearns, but I did not fear him. I did not fear anyone. So not long after that emphatic victory, Hearns posed on the cover of the Ring magazine using his new name, The Hitman, wearing a gangster suit with a Tommy gun tucked under his arm.
Oh, it's an iconic Ring magazine,
Really
isn't it? It's one of the best ones, actually. You know, the illustration of him on there. It just goes to show you how hyped up he was at the time. But that victory he got over Pepino Cuevas was a brilliant victory. It's one that, if you want to see Tommy Hearns at his destructive best, you go and look at that one on YouTube, and you'll thoroughly enjoy how he just dismantled Cuevas so easily. He just did it with such ease in the fight. It's great.
He really did.
We're going back to Sugar Ray Leonard's career now, and we're going to move briefly back to that rematch that he needed and he was so desperate for, and it did come to fruition, and he produced a bewildering display of artistic boxing and simply took the piss out of a now boxing legend. Of course, we're talking about the rematch against Rebel Duran. He went on to regain the WBC and Ring welterweight titles when Duran threw in the towel in the 8th round on November the 25th, 1980 at the Superdome in New Orleans. The No Mas fight, infamously named No Mas. After the fight, Leonard said, I did everything I said I was going to, and he couldn't accept it. He was frustrated, confused. I made him quit. To make a man quit, to make a Roberto Duran quit was better than knocking him out. Roberto Duran, after the fight, of course, he said, I'm retiring from boxing right now. I don't want to fight anymore. Angelo Dundee, he said, we were sky high in the dressing room, different from last time. Everything was cool, it was smooth, good. Ray Arcel said, that's it. I've had it. This is terrible. I've handled thousands of fighters and never had anyone quit on me. I think this guy needs a psychiatrist more than he needs anything else. And Freddie Brown, Duran's co-trainer, said, I was shocked. There was no indication he was getting weak. A No Mas fight, something we've discussed on both of the Duran career profile and the Sugar Ray Leonard profile as well. We do go into a lot more detail about that overall fight. But while that was all happening and Sugar Ray Leonard was winning the titles back against Duran, meanwhile, in front of 9,250 fans at the Joe Louis Arena, Tommy Hearns, the 1980 Fighter of the Year by Boxing Writers Association and Ring Magazine, retained the WBA title. Emmanuel Stewart also picked up the Al Buck Award for Manager of the Year. His opponent at the time, who was Primera, went down in the 2nd, the 5th, and again for the final time in the 6th in a successful defence. The Venezuelan was admitted to hospital after the fight to have his rib examined because he was peppered so much by Tommy Hearns in that fight.
Absolutely mauled by him. Tommy Hearns is king of the division, really. And then obviously it is crazy, isn't it? Just how intertwined and at those moments in history, that the No Mas fight, and then sort of obviously the Hearns fight against the Primera is obviously going to get overlooked. It was his first defence. Again, you know, at the Joe Louis Arena, I mean, it must have been terrific for him. You know, Fighter of the Year, he's got Manager of the Year. They're on top of the world, Team Hearns, at the minute. And Sugar Ray Leonard is now back, and he's back with a bang. So on March 28th, 1981, Leonard was given an easier fight, a layup fight, if you like, against a guy called Larry Bonds, which he deserved following those 2 tough fights with Roberto Duran, and absolutely did. It happens. I mean, even Leonard himself says, you can't just have big fight after big fight. You know, you do need a couple of those ones in there to give yourself a break and to give the fans a break. You know, if you give them too much too quickly, they expect that high level of fights all the time. And you've got to make him right. I think sometimes that is the right thing to do. But if you do it through the divisions kind of thing, you know, for a certain fighter like Leonard, everybody wanted to see him. Everyone wanted to see him in big fights. So you've got to give him a bye for that. Leonard did drop Bonds in the 4th with an uppercut, but his brave opponent fought on until the 10th and until the referee, Arthur McCanty, he stopped the bout. Now, Leonard had successfully retained the WBC and the ring welterweight titles at the Carrier Dome in New York. So that was where he made his first defence in New York. Now, the following month, back to Hearns, and Tommy Hearns made his second defence of the WBA welterweight title against Randy Shields, which was aired on ABC Wide World of Sports and promoted by our mate Bob Arum. The crowd of 8,500 in Phoenix, Arizona witnessed a rough and sometimes dirty fight, with both fighters being warned frequently by the referee. Hearns cut Shields above the right eye in the 8th round and above the left eye in the 9th, and by the end of the 12th, Shields couldn't see and the fight was stopped. Shields, a lot like Bonds against Leonard, was probably too brave for his own good, but it was inevitable. They were going to both be outclassed by two elite fighters and two of the best fighters, not only in the welterweight division, but in the world.
Now, Ray Leonard decided to take on a dangerous Ugandan-born southpaw, the current WBA junior middleweight champion, undefeated in 36 bouts and had never been knocked down. He entered the ring wearing a black robe with yellow serpents on each sleeve and black trunks with a yellow cobra head on the left leg. Now, the Cobra wasn't for Tommy, who was known as the Motor City Cobra by many people in Detroit at the time, but it was actually for a Ugandan witch doctor who had been flown to Houston as a publicity stunt to cast a spell over Leonard and boost the chances of Leonard's opponent, Ayub Khalil. The reason for Sugar Ray's attire was because Ugandan witch doctors are not too thrilled with the colour black or snakes. Now, in the fight, Khalil hit the deck in the 9th after two hard rights, a short left and another right. After rising to his feet, the referee decided that he'd had enough and the fight was stopped. Sugar Ray picked up his second world title in his second weight class. Tommy Hearns made his third defence of the WBA title, retaining it with a stoppage in the 4th round against Pablo Baez on June the 25th, 1981. Hearns staggered Baez with his signature right midway through the round, and the referee stopped about 30 seconds later. Now, Hearns earned $500,000 for that fight, while his opponent received $75,000. So Tommy Hearns is getting the big paydays now at this point because he's the WBA champion, he's beating everybody. He's probably seen as a really big draw at this point. You know, we think of these two guys in our modern era now, we think of maybe Sugar Ray Leonard as maybe the more popular fighter. But then you look at how it was in 1981 and the sort of purses that were being thrown at Tommy Hearns. And actually, to me, it's indicating that he's really up there with Sugar Ray Leonard, if not on par with him in terms of the sort of money that's being thrown at him.
Yep, yeah, he's earning the loot now, isn't he? Just as much as Leonard is. And the crazy thing is both those fights that you just spoke about both took place at the Astrodome in Houston, Texas, on the same card. And this was the first time they'd actually shown they had been on the same card together, and it was actually shown live on closed circuit television before being rebroadcast by NBC Sports World 10 days later. And with the spotlight on both fighters, this was the first time they had day-to-day interaction, and Leonard was the first to begin the trash talk, because obviously, you know, it was obvious where people wanted the next stage of both their careers to go, and that was to fight each other. And Sugar Ray Leonard said they ought to lobotomise Hearns just to see if there's a brain in there. Now, he in his book, Sugar Ray Leonard does explain his reasons for beginning the war of words so early, and he said with the Kaluli fight out of the way, the conversation at the press conference in Houston shifted naturally to the up-and-coming duel with Tommy. I started to wage a fight before the fight, the one to seize the mental edge. There was no time to waste. I hoped to avoid a repeat of what occurred when Duran gained the upper hand on me. The trash talk was comparable in the newspapers, and it probably is a little bit comparable to the nastiness of Muhammad Ali, which he said to many of his opponents, primarily to Joe Frazier, and as he portrayed him as a dumb Uncle Tom before their first fight. So, you know, 10 years on from the fight of the century, and Sugar Ray Leonard's almost using the same style from his legendary fighter, the one he looked up to, Muhammad Ali.
Well, he certainly knew what he was doing, Sugar Ray Leonard. He knew the press would eat it up. And in later life, Ray said, the truth is that they were the times, and that was clearly one of them when I was simply sick of having to live up to the image of the smiling, charming, safe Sugar Ray. It took too much energy. Everyone wants to be a smart ass at one point or another, and I was no exception. Of course, Leonard's words were completely inaccurate. Hearns was actually a very smart fighter, and his trainer, Emmanuel Stewart, was as shrewd as they come. So, now we move into this fight being announced. We're going to talk about the build-up for the fight. We're going to talk about how it all came about. Of course, how it all officially was signed, sealed, and delivered. So, Johnston, if you want to just take us through some of these stories that we put together for this, because there's some brilliant stories of how this fight actually got put together.
Yeah, so it is, again, I mean, the war of the words began, obviously, and then we did speak about, 10 years on from the fight of the century. We were set to have another moment in time where two of the biggest stars in boxing would meet in the ring with similar styles. The classic boxer of Sugar Ray Leonard against the fearsome puncher of Tommy Hearns. It was almost ironic that as Muhammad Ali made his slow and painful decline in the late 70s, which is just tragic to watch, we would witness another star being born, a charismatic, intelligent and delightful fighter in Sugar Ray Leonard. He drew on even more comparisons from Ali. Sugar Ray was assisted by his former trainer, Angelo Dundee, as we've spoke about already, who was part of a strong team that guided Sugar Ray through. He made some significant judgments when matchmaking for Ray, and as we mentioned with the Tommy Hearns, he delayed that and those important advice in the corner. And again, we spoke about this a lot in the career profiles where Ray said how vital Dundee was in the corner, and he will be again in this fight. Now, Dr. Stuart Kaisenbaum, who was a Michigan boxing commissioner from 1981 to 1992, spoke about Leonard and the impact that he made during this time. Now, he said, when Ali left, we never thought there would be another major attraction. Sugar Ray had it all. He had the looks, the ability, and he was agreeable to white America, not just black America. Sugar Ray was a marketing marvel. And Larry Merchant agreed with the doctor, saying Sugar Ray Leonard was sort of a mini Ali. He was the most charismatic and accomplished fighter out there and had a chance to become the most important figure of this time in the ring.
Okay, we are live in Las Vegas with the two fighters. First, you, Ray, the 8-inch edge and reach that Tommy has over you. How do you combat that? How do you cope?
Just Ray Leonard, Howard. I feel that my experience through fighting some of the great fighters of the past put me in a position where that I know fully well I can nullify Hearns' reach and height advantage. No problem.
No problem. Tommy, in the Shields fight, your habit and the manner taught by Emmanuel Stewart, your great trainer, of keeping the left at the side rendered you vulnerable, at least on that occasion, to the Randy Shields right. Have you changed in any regard in your training?
Notice, Howard, in the fight with Shields, I did carry my left hand low, and I happen to carry my left hand low in all my fights. And I carry my left hand low for a reason, Howard. Notice that Randy wasn't able to hit me with any right hand when I had my left hand down like that, because I was watching it all the time. Every move that Shields made, I was watching him, able to do something all the time. And basically in this fight, I'm going to be carrying my left hand low too.
Because this is a man with a strikingly swift right hand lead. You've got to be extra prepared.
Well, I'm here to prove that just because I carry my left hand low, I'm not a bowman for a right hand.
All right. Now, what will be your overall tactical approach, Ray? Do you want to disclose it?
Sure. I mean, there's no problem with that. I think that lateral movement, consistent left jab, and keep him off balance and capitalize on his mistakes. Basically, basic fundamentals, Howard. Nothing new, nothing different.
And what about you? What will be your approach? Bang, bang, bang.
Well, basically I'm going to be using a lot of combinations. And I'm not going to get too much into my strategy, what I'm planning to do. But basically, I'm just trying to keep him on the end of the stick and let him fight his way in.
Now, let me ask you something both candidly. Do you really dislike one another personally, or is this part of a hype for a great fight?
I have nothing against Hearns. I think I respect him as a fighter, as a person. I think that we, thrown verbal shots at one another in the past and the present. But I think now reality takes place on 16th of September.
And what's your position?
Basically, Howard, I feel the same. I feel that I'm like Leonard said, he has nothing against me. I basically doesn't have anything against him. Basically, it's just there's two champions in the same weight division, and which I think that it should only be one.
And you think it should be you?
Yes, and I'm here to satisfy myself and relative people.
Now, to understand just how much Ray Leonard was on the cusp of greatness going into this fight, Ollie Dunlap, Leonard's administrative assistant from 1980 to 1992, said, "This was a boxer, this was a gladiator, and celebrity-wise, he's being moved over to the entertainment field." George Kimball of the Boston Herald also said, "His popularity was something that transcended the boxing. There were people who had never watched boxing at all, but they knew who Sugar Ray Leonard was." Angelo Dundee said this about Sugar Ray Leonard: "People who think he's a nice guy don't know how nice he is, and people who think he's a tough fighter don't know how tough of a fighter he is. He's a nicer guy and a tougher fighter than people realise." Even Manny Stewart cheered in on Dundee's assessment, saying, "One of Ray's greatest attributes was that he was such a strong finisher. Even in the first Duran fight, he was the guy coming on over the last few rounds. When people looked at that baby face and small bone structure, they didn't realise how strong and physical he was, but Sugar Ray Leonard could be a total animal in the ring."
Absolutely. I mean, all of those, just to point out just how big Sugar Ray Leonard was. Obviously, he had another opponent, and many people do say, that it's a bit like you can't help but pull comparisons from the fight of the century, because Muhammad Ali was the face of that fight and Frazier was his opponent. No matter how great we know Joe Frazier was, sometimes he got overshadowed by Muhammad Ali, and I think the same thing happens with Tommy Hearns. Although we have the Fantastic Four, everyone remembers Hearns, Duran, Leonard, and Hagler, but I think it was important to just point out the fact that Sugar Ray was the A side, if you like. Unfortunately, with people who love Tommy Hearns, I know people will always have debate till the cows come home about who's just as good. I mean, it's difficult to assess it really, but the funny thing is, his opponent, Tommy Hearns, he was the young, undefeated fighter. He hadn't been beaten. And many felt that he would not only rival Sugar Ray Leonard, like you just said earlier, Sean, but he could possibly surpass him. And Hearns was not your usual welterweight. Ralph Wiley of Sports Illustrated explains, Tommy Hearns was physically unique. Very broad back, very long arms, and because he had so thin legs, he could carry 147 pounds and still be at 6'1", which is just incredible. It defies logic and physics, really. And once again, back to Dr. Stuart Curzon-Bown, who was also taken back by Hearns' ability to make that 147-pound limit. And he said he was just a freak. I mean a freak, that someone can put this body together and give it the ability and know how to use it. And that was Manuel's job, showing how to take this body and make a champion out of him. And we've seen his knockout ratio. We've run through it. He was knocking everyone out for fun. Only went distance a few times. An amazing puncher, a fantastic welterweight. He was the welterweight champion. So was Sugar Ray Leonard. But it was really... you can't even imagine how much of a big fight this was. And that's why they kept putting on the fight of the century. 10 years on, you've got this great fight in 1981. And it really is... it must have been so fascinating to be a part of.
Mike Trainer, this is what he had to say. "When we finally made our deal with the Hearns camp, we did things the way I'd always felt a big fight should be done. We did all-out negotiations with Hearns representatives and with Caesars Palace first. Then we went out and hired somebody to act as the promoter. It was a four-way consortium of Dan Doyle, Shelley Finkel, and the husband and wife duo of Dan and Kathy Duver, who headed up main events. Trainer said Finkel acted as the liaison between both camps, and he said he helped work things out with Hearns' people, and he was close to the Duvers. We basically hired them to put on the promotion, and it pretty much put main events on the map." Now, Mike Trainer was also the co-promoter, and his main role was to raise the capital for the fight and handle the New England pay-per-view sale. Dan, Kathy, and Shelley handled a variety of tasks, and they did a terrific job. Bob Arum was later brought on board to help with the overseas markets and to coordinate the pay-per-view distribution. And all them names that we mentioned there are all in their own right have got some epic events that they've been involved in over the years, with epic fighters, with legendary nights, some other legendary nights that we've already covered. I know a few of them have been involved in, and this was one of the very early ones that these lot were all involved in together. And it's kind of strange saying it, because all these guys and girls would go on to eventually be completely separate promoters, do completely separate things, but for this one particular fight, they all came together.
And they did, and obviously Shelley Finkel being thrown in there as well. And we know only too recently, Shelley obviously guided Deontay Wilder. I think he still does. I think he's still a part of it. I'm not sure, but this was one of his first major jobs, major roles, I believe, at the time. And obviously Dan and Kathy, we know, main events too well. So it's crazy how this was their real first big event. So really just shows you how far back this was, really. I mean, it's crazy. 1981, I was only a year off me being born, but it doesn't feel like it was like nearly 40 years ago. It's crazy. But the New York State Athletic Commission, they assigned Dwayne Ford, Chuck Minka and Lou Tabert as the 3 judges. And the 63-year-old Davey Pearl was actually named as the referee. Now, it was during the pre-fight rules meeting when Dundee started the mind games himself, and he asked Pearl to be vigilant of certain tactics by Hearns that he had noticed in his previous fights. I'm guessing probably that Western fight where he's thumbed him in the eye. It was a bit of a dirty fight. And he had another couple of other ones that there was a couple of dirty tactics in there. But Dundee said, watch how many punches Hearns misses and then hits the guy with his backhand, or how many times he'll miss with a jab and then hold the guy with a left hand behind the head and throw a right. Dundee then went on to say, they'll be waiting for it, but so will my guy. When Hearns does that, he's off balance and Ray will catch him with left hands.
Now, it was a few weeks before the fight, Leonard was actually caught with an elbow by his sparring partner, Odell Hadley, under his left eye. Luckily, he wasn't cut, but it did give him an unwelcome shiner, putting the fight in danger of being postponed to another date. After a few days, the swelling reduced, and the camp was sworn to secrecy. There was a more serious injury within the Hearns camp. Just 10 days before the fight, Hearns was sparring with Marlon Starling and ended up breaking his jaw. Starling was scheduled in as the supporting act for the main event and due to be shown live, but instead of replacing the fight, local promoters advertised that they would show clips of the sparring session instead. Hearns was also sparring with Ray Leonard, and many reporters observed that he was the cousin of Ray, but Roger Leonard eventually squashed those rumours, saying, he's not my cousin. If he was my cousin, do you think he'd be helping the guy who's going to fight my brother? Emmanuel Stewart was worried in the days leading up to the fight, and he said, I was afraid Tommy was overtraining. I tried to rein him in, but for the first time since he was 10 years old, he wasn't listening to me. He had this crowd of people around him, and they were telling him, Ray and Ollie run their camp. Angelo just comes in at the end, and they tell him what to do. So he was running in the morning, running again at night. When I told him, I thought he was doing too much. He said, I'm the one doing the fighting. Now, in another incident, Stewart said, a few days before the fight, there was a crowd at Tommy's workout. We were supposed to be there sparring, but Shelley Saltman, who was doing PR for us for that fight, grabbed the microphone and announced that Tommy was going to box. And I said, what? I thought I hadn't heard right, but Tommy had told Shelley to announce it. Yes, I'm going to box, he told me. He went 7 rounds with Caveman Lee and Dwayne Johnson that day. One of Thomas Hearns' hangers-on even accidentally discharged a firearm in Caesar's Palace and was escorted off the premises along with several of the Hearns entourage. And now you're getting to start the feeling of how Tommy Hearns' success was possibly starting to get to his head a little bit, by all accounts of the people that were there, saying that he had this entourage all of a sudden. For the first time since he was 10 years old, he weren't listening to Emmanuel Stewart, and he's boxing so close to the fight. He's they're supposed to be winding down, ready for the fight, not getting himself all hyped up to go in there and risking such a big fight.
It's crazy. The fact that he done 6 rounds with Caveman and Caveman Lee and Duran Johnson, and those were two guys from that Kronk gym. They were just sparring guys, and obviously, 7 rounds. I mean, that's crazy. What are you doing, Tommy? You've got Emmanuel Stewart that's guided your career brilliantly, and he's like, why are you sparring? I mean, the fact that he's starting to listen to these guys, Ray and Ollie, that they don't run the camp, and the camp, and Angelo comes in the last minute. That was something that we spoke about in the Sugar Ray Leonard career profile again, where, Ray sort of cleared that up in terms of he didn't just come in at the end. You can't just have a guy come in at the end and tell everyone what to do. It doesn't work like that. There's more to it. And what Angelo brought to the team was just as important as what anyone else did. It just shows you Hearns a bit naive now. He hasn't been the distance really, the 15. He has never been the 15-round distance either. And it's interesting. He's probably training as hard as he's ever trained because of the stamina stuff as well. That's the sort of vibe I was getting, and just sort of reading through all this, and obviously knocking about hangers on, not helping him. But the fight itself, I mean, Leonard was guaranteed $8 million, and Hearns a minimum of $5 million, which is interesting because they were both, champions, both top of their game, and Hearns was the champion from the fighter of the year in 1980. So interesting. So with each boxer receiving a percentage of the revenue as well. So Leonard ended up with 11 million and Hearns got about 8 million. So still good money. The fight was shown live on closed circuit television to 298 locations with 1.5 million seats in the United States and Canada. Caesars Palace knew they were getting the biggest boxing event he had ever hosted, so they moved the venue to the car park to accommodate the demand. They actually constructed the temporary stadium in the tennis courts of the Palace with a capacity of nearly 24,000, and ringside tickets were priced at $500. I think the cheapest tickets you could get was $50. Now, by the time fight week arrived, many of the top-notch hotels had been booked up by high rollers, meaning that the press had to resort to staying at the less glamorous Marina Motel. And someone from the press actually said, when I checked in, the bellhop asked me if I knew where he could find any girls. You're getting the vibe of what it was like.
Yeah, they got the shithole, and all the celebrities would all turn up and get all the nice hotel rooms, and the press that had probably been covering these two guys' careers for the last 4 or 5 years, they end up getting in a dingy motel somewhere off the bleeding freeway, and they get all these probably smackheads asking him where the girls were. Yeah, I couldn't imagine that. So before we get into the fight, then a couple of quotations that we want to go through from some of the people that were around at the time, and I think these give a lot of context to how things went down. Now, Cus D'Amato, who have recently done a career profile, and this is what he said before the fight: "This fight won't be won by skill; it'll be won by the one with the will to win." Another philosophical quote from Cus there. An interested observer of the fight was the late, great, recently departed, marvellous Marvin Hagler, and he gave his opinion on this fight. "I expect Hearns to try and take Leonard out early, and I'm sure he will be the aggressor of the fight. Of course, when that bell rings, you never know what might happen. Hearns might not fight the way he's supposed to, but I think he will." Hagler also had this to say about Sugar Ray Leonard: "The first Duran fight was his toughest test so far, but this fight against Hearns will be even tougher." He also gave his assessment on how he felt the fight would pan out. To neutralise Hearns' reach advantage, Leonard is going to have to stay either inside him or outside him. "My guess is that he will stay outside and box and make Tommy come to him. Leonard is a very good counterpuncher." On Hearns, Hagler said, "The way Hearns carries his left hand so low looks dangerous, but it really isn't. Not if he keeps the proper distance. There's a safe distance and an unsafe distance, and Hearns is awfully quick. If Leonard tries to come inside that left, well, there's a saying in boxing that if he's close enough to hit you, he's close enough for you to hit him." That's especially true with those long arms of Tommy Hearns.
Great assessment from Hagler, and you can't knock. I mean, Cus D'Amato as well. Brilliant quote. But Hearns and Ray Leonard, they had a few things to say, and Tommy Hearns says, "My right hand could make this the easiest fight I've ever had. It's very possible this fight could end very, very quickly. No more than 3 rounds." And Leonard countered. He said, "Hearns makes mistakes. He tries to knock everybody out with one punch. I use my mind. Maybe Tommy would do 2 if he had one. Many felt that the fight would come down to 2 things in particular, and that was Hearns' punching power versus Sugar Ray Leonard's boxing abilities. But Stewart was quick to point out, people forget that Tommy wasn't always a puncher. In his whole amateur career, he hardly ever knocked anybody out. He was a boxer then, and he's a boxer now. Now, many did question Tommy Hearns' stamina. And when Hearns was asked about this, he said, I might be tired, but Ray better not underestimate me. Tired, I'm still able to break ribs and break jaws. And then Leonard's response was, he's trying to psych me out. He's not doing a very good job. Emmanuel Stewart, once again, he was worried about the judges on the night. And he said, if the fight goes to 15 rounds, then it goes to the decision. It will be interesting, he said. So in other words, I think he was trying to say that the judges are probably going to be siding with Leonard. And Dundee actually had a little quote to say. He said, my guy's going to back him up, although few expect that to happen.
So great quotes leading into the fight, and some great little trying to play mind games with each other, aren't they? You know, just going into typical of a fight of such magnitude. Of course, you know, you got to try and make the comparisons to big fights that we have today, and this is just a huge fight.
A hot night for a hot fight on the desert. From Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, Nevada, HBO Sports presents World Championship Boxing. The showdown between WBC welterweight champion Sugar Ray Leonard and WBA welterweight champion Thomas Hearns.
The fight itself is something now that we are going to go into. We are going to discuss the fight. We're going to give you a little bit of a breakdown of how that fight goes down. But before we do that, we're going to talk about the pay-per-view itself. It was available to 1 million homes in 24 cities in the United States, with the fight being televised live or delayed in about 50 countries. Some 300 million people worldwide watched the unification bout. HBO secured the rebroadcast rights for $750,000 and aired the fight on September the 26th, 1981. Now, Leonard opened as an 8-5 favourite, but was a 7-5 underdog by the time the fight came around, due to the Motown money that came rolling in. Some were that confident that Tommy Hearns would win, and a lot of them put a hell of a lot of money on it. Probably some of them lost a lot of money that particular night, putting the mortgages on the hitman. Now, in an unofficial press poll, 34 out of 48 writers actually picked Sugar Ray Leonard to win. The Showdown, as it was known, would establish boxing's first undisputed welterweight champion since Jose Napoles. Hearns was the WBA champion and Leonard was the WBC and the Ring champion. But he was also the WBA junior middleweight champion at the time. Now, once the fight had concluded, he would be allowed to make a decision on what weight he wanted to continue at, which would effectively end his title reign in either of the divisions, no matter what happened in the fight.
Many celebrities as well came to the fight. Obviously, massive fight like this. We had Bill Cosby in the crowd. Boo. Jack Nicholson. Reverend Jesse Jackson. John McEnroe, and that's just to name a few. There was many, many more there. Along with those celebrities, the actors, etc., the singers. There was the biggest stars in boxing. Larry Holmes was there. Joe Frazier. Jake LaMotta was there. And, of course, Muhammad Ali was there. And he got the biggest cheer above them all. Before the fight, interestingly, Tony Ayala, he was on the undercard of the fight, and he's a guy we've done on the dark side of boxing, an absolute piece of shit. Well, he was he won his fight, not a guy out in a round or two, and he was running up to the ring, calling out Sugar Ray Leonard. He wanted Leonard. Leonard sort of brushed it off and sort of laughed it off, but sports writer Michael Katz actually recalled the incident. He said, it occurred to me then that you never heard anyone calling out Hearns. Nobody wanted to fight a 6'1" welterweight with the power to destroy Penipo Cuevas inside 2 rounds. And obviously Roberto Duran later on, he destroys him. Great opinion there. I don't think anyone did ever call out Tommy Hearns. And the only other thing is obviously with them being both champions, they had to toss a coin to decide who comes out first. And And Leonard won the toss, and it was Tommy Hearns that did make his way to the ring first.
I never knew that. They just tossed a coin over it like they do in football. They toss a coin to see who's going to kick off first and who's going to play from which side of the field. Never knew that. That's another little great story there from yourself. So as always, then. We're going to go into the round breakdown. We're going to do in big chunks of rounds and trying to go through it as best as possible and try to describe the fight as best as we possibly can. Of course, most of you might have already watched this fight, or you might go and watch this fight afterwards, but we'll do our best to describe how this fight went down and how we saw it in our opinion as the course of watching it again. Now, we're going to do it in round chunks. Like I said, we're going to do it for rounds 1 to 5 first and foremost. And Bob Arum, who we spoke about earlier, he wasn't even the promoter of this fight. And he had arranged the pay-per-view distribution. He was actually informed of a glitch to the cable system, and thousands of homes in California were receiving the fight for free. They weren't even paying any of the pay-per-view fees as well.
Brilliant.
Now, because of this fact, because it was free and typical Bob Arum fashion, he didn't want this fight to go ahead. He wanted it to be delayed until this glitch had been sorted. So he had it in his head that the referee, Pearl, should stop Leonard and Hearns from even starting the fight until the technical difficulties had actually been resolved. But, of course, the referee ignored him. And through the early rounds, Tommy Hearns, he was in command of this fight, dictating the tempo with his long left jab. Sugar Ray used his speed and excellent footwork to dance away from danger, clearly wary of Hearns and the power that he possessed. As the first round drew to a close, Roger Leonard excitedly shouted something to his brother which distracted Ray. As he took his eyes off Hearns, he was caught with a punch just after the bell. That would be the first of many exchanges in this fight after the bell, where the referee Pearl had to be on hand to split the fighters up. Now Pearl jumped in between them after the first to signal the end of the round. As Leonard stumbled back to his corner, Yanks Morton shouted, "Kenny, get Roger out of the corner." And Kenny did just that. He pushed Roger out and he came in for the rest of the fight.
Brilliant. I didn't know that. I never knew that Kenny was removed and Roger came in. Great little story. Bob Arum as well. Brilliant. So Hearns, obviously, he continued to stalk Leonard during the early rounds, and when he got close enough to land, it was never a clear punch. It was always like a glancing blow. And Leonard, on the other hand, was advised to move anti-clockwise by Angelo Dundee. He said if you move anti-clockwise, he actually denies Hearns his left jab, which prevents him from using that dangerous right. And it's something, you do notice it. And Leonard used the whole ring to his advantage. But when in range, he was able to land and move away quickly from anything Hearns threw back. Now, it must have been frustrating for Tommy, who was finding the elusive Leonard difficult to read due to the awkward angles that he was giving him, and he was actually forced to throw punches in awkward angles and try to attack in those awkward angles of attack. Really difficult. It was hard. The way Leonard was fighting was tricky. Obviously, Tommy's in control, but Leonard's smart. He's elusive. He's only throwing pot shots, but Tommy's the clear aggressor and in demanding the fight. But it was hard for him to just land that clean shot that he was talking about. One flush shot and I'll knock him out. He never showed it, obviously. Tommy kept on smiling for it. You can see he's always smiling at the end of the fights, even during the fight. They're sort of playing possum at times, and he was feeling positive. Obviously, I would feel you could see he was confident, he was relaxed that eventually he was going to land something. But it was just quite clever what Dundee had told Leonard to do. Although Leonard lost those early exchanges, he was clearly looking for the distance rather than just those early rounds.
Now the third round finally brought the cat and mouse fight alive when both decided it was time for some brief toe-to-toe action. It was of course Leonard that made a sharp exit from inside the trenches, and although neither fighter had come out on top, a small mark did appear under Sugar Ray Leonard's left eye. The mark was a subject much debated years later, with Leonard's equipment men Dunlap and Julius, aka Juice Gatlin, believing that the bruise that appeared was down to the elbow from Odell Hadley 3 weeks earlier. Stewart, on the other hand, thought otherwise, saying, "Sometimes a fighter will get cut in training and it will open up during a fight, but I never saw any evidence of swelling on Ray's face beforehand." Interestingly, Dundee was using the Enswell eye iron, something that is commonly used today, but in 1981 it was considered to be a device of alien. It was something that was never really seen in a boxing ring in a corner. As we now know, the Enswell is a must-have item for any established boxing cutman, and it worked like a dream for Dundee as he succeeded in reducing the swelling for Leonard. It also must have given him more confidence as he was clearly unfazed by any facial damage. He even threw the bolo punch, rolling up his right and cheekily landed with his left. Hearns responded by sticking out his gum shield in a mocking gesture. The opening 5 rounds was a demonstration of the beautiful art of boxing, two completely different styles that cancelled each other out. Now this, of course, was to the displeasure of some of the crowd, who you can actually hear booing at times when watching the fight back. Ringside reporter again, Katz, said there were pockets of booing during the opening 5 rounds. Few boxing fans would cheer the Fischer-Spassky chess matches. Writer John Shulian summed up the first 5, writing, "For the first 5 rounds, the 6'1" Hearns was in command, stinging Leonard with his jab and keeping his shorter opponent at bay with his vaunted 78-inch reach. Unable to get inside where he wanted to operate, Leonard had to fight on the outside."
It really was cat and mouse. I can understand why the crowd were booing at times. You know, if you want to just see the toe-to-toe action, you know, the first 5 rounds isn't that, but it is a great demonstration of boxing. It was masterclass from Leonard at times, even though he lost a chunk of those rounds. I think he probably won 1, maybe 2, possibly. I think probably 1. Hearns dominated, really. He was always the one in control. Leonard didn't really land much, but neither did Hearns. And it was almost like he was on the run. He had that slight exchange, great little exchange, and then comes out of it with a little bruise. Whether it happened from the fight, you know, again, it's up for debate, isn't it? But it was clearly a Hearns first 5 rounds. Now, this is where the momentum shifted, and it shifted in that 6th round when Sugar Ray began landing the punches that Thomas Hearns had been expected to land. Now, Hearns had a lapse of concentration, dropping his right hand for just a split second, and Leonard seized the opening. He landed a powerful left hook to the body that sent Hearns back to the ropes. A moment that Stewart described to American sports writer Pat Putman as the punch from which Hearns never recovered. Now, it was a thing of beauty. Sugar displayed his killer instinct, targeting the body with speed and accuracy. Hearns shifted his elbows down to try and block. It was just class, loads of speed. You could just almost see it. It's just how he was. It was almost just the repetition that Cuss always spoke about. We went through his career profile. It was a natural thing, and it was the sound of the bell that signalled the end of the round that actually saved Hearns from potentially being stopped, or at least being put to the canvas. In Leonard's book, he actually picked up on this weakness before the fight, and he did execute it so masterfully. And he said, Tommy was also susceptible to body shots. The way to beat him, I deduced from the films, was to chop him down like a tree by going to the midsection as often as possible.
Now, in the 7th, it was all Sugar Ray who peppered Hearns with some solid right hands. Hearns absorbed the punishment, but Stewart contemplated throwing in the towel, but he didn't, and Hearns managed to survive. Leonard finished the round by landing 3 left hooks, and when the bell ended that round, Hearns wobbled back to his corner, and Stewart said, "I was ready to stop the fight, and if Ray had landed 1 more solid punch, I would have, but Tommy was avoiding them, barely." And much to my surprise, Tommy went back to boxing, and eventually took control again. And that's exactly what happened. By the 8th, Thomas Hearns had got his second wind, but the roles had reversed. Leonard had become the stalker, and Hearns was on his bike dancing away and firing in jabs. By the 9th round, both fighters were feeling the pace, and they both reserved their energy for the later rounds. Dundee said that he told Ray to bring the pace down. "I was afraid Ray was going to pop a cork in there." It was to Hearns' advantage because he was able to clear his head and get some much needed air into his lungs. They both took most of the 10th off as well and took that round to have more of a rest. And the crowd again, of course, you can understand, began to boo because there's not a lot of action going on. Now, rather than go through the motions, it was Hearns that realised that he was not under as much pressure, so he began to influence the pace, and he became the aggressor.
It's crazy. It really is to and fro, this fight. And so moving into rounds 11 and 14. So in the 11th, Sugar Ray's left eye was slowly beginning to close, and it appeared that the fight may be in a bit of jeopardy. Hearns was back, forcing the action, while Leonard continued to be evasive and make it difficult for him to hit. And even Hearns said this. He said later on, he kept moving off to the side, so I couldn't hit him with the full force of the punch. I still haven't hit him with my best shot. Why didn't I land, or why didn't I try to land more right hands? Basically, because I don't throw a punch if I know it's not going to land. So it just says, again, I mean, although Hearns is in control here, Leonard is using the ring savviness of just staying out of trouble and just not allowing him to land that flush shot.
Now, as the 12th round ended, Hearns, he seemed firmly in control. Both fighters even softly tapped gloves. Hearns, though, had won over the crowd with chants of "Tommy, Tommy." They were thundering around the stadium, quite evident to hear. Now, obviously, of course, hearing that, Tommy jumped up from his stool and began waving his arms as if cheering for himself to finish off Sugar Ray Leonard there and then. Now, Emmanuel Stewart, he saw a different side to this, looking back on it, and he said, "I was talking to Tommy, and all of a sudden his head slumped down. He was out of gas. I knew right then it was over." At the end of the 12th, there was an abundance of respect between them now. In the other corner, Dundee, he was trying to revive Leonard. He was trying to get some life back into him. And that was when he spoke the most famous words of this particular fight. "You're blowing it, son. You're blowing it."
Angelo Dundee has to be very concerned in the Leonard corner.
You got 9 minutes. You're blowing it now, son. You're blowing it.
You got 9 minutes, so he says, isn't he? Absolute legendary moment. And you see Leonard looks shattered. You're thinking Hearns is in control. What you don't expect is what happens in the 13th round. And it only Emmanuel Stewart probably knew. And it was in that 13th round that Sugar Ray somehow landed a right hand that shook Tommy Hearns to his toes. He dropped his hands again, though, Tommy. Just dropped his hands. And he's clearly exhausted, can't even hold his hands up. He's knackered. And obviously sensing that chance to go for the kill, Sugar Ray Leonard pounces again. He's slashing and shoving. He sort of half punches, half pushes Hearns through the ropes onto the ring apron. And that famous moment in the fight. And referee Davey Pearl rushes over and he rules it a push. He rules it a push. It's not a knockdown, he says. But moments later, Leonard clearly then does catch Hearns. And he puts Hearns once again through those ropes. And this time, Davey Pearl, the referee, counted to 9, and he was waving Sugar Ray Leonard to resume the brawl until the bell rang. And again, just a mad moment that you'd always remember from this fight, that glorious 13th round when Sugar Ray Leonard just flipped it on its head.
Leonard finding a little range with the left jab now, and a right hand staggers Tommy Hearns. Hearns in trouble again. Leonard all over him. Leonard pounding away with combinations inside. Hearns trying to grab him. Can't do it. Hearns driven into the ropes. Leonard pounds him right through the ropes. Davey Pearl, he's not counting. Hearns evidently pushed through there. Hearns getting up, shaking his head like he's not hurt, but he's in all kinds of trouble. Leonard jumps on him again.
Well, Tim, we know what a great finisher Ray Leonard is. He must have thrown 1,000 punches. All the punches he didn't throw in those last 4 rounds, he saved up. And boy, did he let him go.
Hearns lunging in desperation, landed a right hand that snapped back the head of Leonard. Leonard knows he needs a knockout to win this championship. Hearns backing up, Leonard after him. And still wobbly-legged. You can see Tommy Hearns having difficulty staying upright. A left hand scored by Leonard and a right behind it. Hearns battered around the ring, won't go down. What a flurry by Sugar Ray Leonard, and again Hearns trying to hold on, but he can't get a grip on him. A right hand by Leonard, and a left. Missing with the right as Hearns sprawls through the ropes. Davey Pearl this time counting, Gil.
Yes, he did count, Tim, because if the ropes hold you up when you're going to fall, it's counted as a knockdown.
And there's the bell ending round 13.
Yeah, it really was a memorable moment of the fight, and it would obviously be a prelude as to what was to come. Now, as the fighters returned to their corners, Dundee was on his feet, shouting at Pearl. It should have been 2 knockdowns. In the corner, Dundee warned Leonard that he he might be behind on points. And at this point, he was behind on points. Officially, on the scorecards, he was. And Dundee said, I really didn't think he was, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to give him a little needle. But as it turned out, his worst case assessment was right on the mark. Now, Hearns might have led on the scorecards, but he was utterly spent, and Leonard came charging out of the corner like a sprinter from the blocks to greet him with a left hook. In the first minute of the 14th round, he sent Hearns reeling with a savage right hand to the head, and followed up with 4 or 5 more punches that knocked Hearns all the way across the ring. Leonard chased Hearns down in a neutral corner and then trapped him there, landing 3 rapid-fire hooks to the head of an utterly defenceless Hearns. The referee, Davy Pearl, stopped the fight at 1 minute and 45 seconds of the 14th round, and Ray Charles Leonard was the undisputed welterweight champion of the world.
Ray Leonard has to know that Tommy Hearns' legs are gone. Everybody else here does. Big right hand. Hearns staggers along the ropes. Leonard after him. He's in all kinds of trouble again. Gil, how come Hearns doesn't grab onto Leonard here?
Tim, he's not trying to grab. He's never been in this position before. He doesn't know how to grab. He's always had the other guy in that position.
Leonard now going to the head and down to the body, banging away at Hearns, who hasn't fired a punch back. There he tries a combination, got the left in and another left, but Leonard staying right there, measuring his spots, pounding to the body and a right to the head. And Davy Pearl steps in, that's it! A 14th round knockout victory for Sugar Ray Leonard.
What a great finish. I mean, Hearns briefly, though unconvincingly, did protest the stoppage before stumbling into the arms of his cornermen, and smiling through his gum shield, Leonard raised both hands in the air as the crowd roared its approval of what had been a thrilling performance by both men. And Hearns said, I knew where I was at all times. And this is what he later recalled. And I wasn't dizzy or nothing. It just seemed like every time he hit me with a combination, I hadn't got myself back together yet before he hit me again. It was in my mind to try and hang on and last the fight, even after I was hurt. I thought I was in control of myself, but the referee didn't. There's nothing I can do about it.
Now, as we was talking about, Johnson, the cards, and we was referring to Hearns being ahead, all 3 ringside judges had Hearns in front at the time of the stoppage. Minka had him by 4 at 125 to 121, Tabbert by 3, 125 to 122, and Dwayne Ford by 2, 124 to 122.
The cards there, as you can see, quite close across the board. Unofficially, though, the Associated Press, their scorecard was 126 to 122 in favour of Sugar Ray Leonard. And in the unofficial New York Times scorecard was 124 to 123 to Tommy Hearns. Very close. Some people had it Leonard. Close. I felt Hearns was ahead, and it was a great stoppage from Sugar Ray.
It was definitely ahead in the fight, leading into, say, the 12th round onwards was where you could see he was absolutely spent in the fight. And that 13th round in particular that we've just described to everybody, you know, you can tell at this point by watching it that it's only a matter of time before Sugar Ray catches up with him and finishes the fight. And lo and behold, he does it straight away. The 14th round, as we described, he comes out and he just goes absolutely nuts on finishing the fight. And that's one of the things that was mentioned earlier by Manuel Stewart. He said Sugar Ray Leonard is such a strong finisher, and that's exactly what he did in this fight. He finished the fight on top and essentially caused an upset. No, I wouldn't say an upset. I'd say an upset in the sense that he was behind on the scorecards. They must have known he was behind on the scorecards. For him to come out and pull it off the way he did was just testament to Sugar Ray Leonard's legacy, really, and just created what was to be a memorable moment and the reason why it's been selected for this legendary night. Now, let's move into the aftermath of this particular fight. And Sugar Ray Leonard, this is what he had to say. I proved I'm the best welterweight in the world. This fight surpasses all my professional accomplishments. Tommy Hearns, he said, I knew I was ahead. There was only one problem, though. I got hit with a good shot. I didn't think the fight should have been stopped. I wasn't hurt. But that's the breaks. Now, Yanks Morton, Leonard's co-trainer, he said, the 6th should have been the last round. Ray had him, and he got a little excited. If he had just shortened up on the punches, he'd have knocked him out. Emanuel Stewart, on the stoppage of the fight, this is what he had to say. I have no qualms about the referee's decision. Some people said because Tommy was ahead on the scorecards he should have been given a chance to finish the fight. But the truth is, if he'd have made it out of that round, he couldn't have even made it back to the corner, much less lasted another round. His legs were gone. He was cooked. Now finally, the referee, Davy Pearl, this is what he had to say on the scoring of the fight. I figured Hearns was winning all those little light hitting rounds, but Leonard was doing all the heavy damage. I thought it was close. Geez, what if I had let the fight go on and Ray just barely won the last round and they gave Hearns the decision? Caesars wouldn't have had to tear the stadium down for the Grand Prix. The people, they would have done it for them.
That's right. They had to get rid of the stadium the next day for the Grand Prix. That's right. That's interesting. I'm just saying, again, we didn't mention, but yeah, that makeshift stand was just ripped down literally straight after this memorable night, and that's exactly what it was. It was one of the most memorable fights in the last 30 years. Aired on HBO, and it was summed up brilliantly in the Four Kings book as a thrilling war of give and take, ebb and flow. And when it was all over, one man was left standing. It really was ebb and flow, and it was give and take. And the fight did gross $35 million. The live gate was $5.9 million, and the revenue from pay-per-view was $7.5 million. And obviously, a few of those in California got to witness the fight for free, which is great. And Bob Arum Morris had a heart attack. I think that's fantastic. The ring named Leonard versus Hearns their first fight as the fight of the year in 1981 and the greatest title fight of all time in 1996. And Tommy Hearns probably sums it up wonderfully. He said, "We put on a great show for them. If you never see another fight, but you see this one, that would be enough."
Well, he's very right. It's definitely one of the greatest fights of all time. It's the reason we picked this as our next episode for the Legendary Night series. We've covered Leonard, we've covered Hearns, we've covered Duran, we've covered Hagler in many ways, shapes or forms across the network, and this was one of the fights that we'd not done yet, and we said we wanted to do because we do believe it's such a magnitude of a fight. If you think about it, really, this is this is part of that Four Kings era. You had obviously Leonard and Duran, then you had obviously Leonard and Hearns. Hagler comes into the forefront a little bit later on, a year or so later, and then it all starts to really kick off over the next couple of years. And this was one of them fights from that era that really, it's hard to describe how, for me personally, it's hard to describe how beautiful of a fight it is to watch. A tale of completely two different styles, two different fighters, and the way it started off so well for Tommy Hearns and the way it just slowly eroded and went in the favour of Sugar Ray Leonard, who was able to finish the fight so brilliantly. And it's a fight that we would highly recommend you as a listener, if you've not already watched it, you need to go and watch it. You really need to go and watch this fight. But I know that I know most of the listeners, most of our listeners, Johnston, they've seen it.
Oh yeah,
they love it. They absolutely love it. When we posted
inside out.
Yeah, when we posted about this on social media, it was like, yeah, great fight. Looking forward to listening to this one, and I hope everybody does enjoy our retelling of this particular story and the way their careers so heavily intertwined with each other. I mean, I didn't genuinely realise until going into this that they had so many fights on the same night, fights on the same card, intertwined the careers so much. It was like it was destined to be. This fight was always destined to be. But it wasn't the only fight that these two had. Of course, it would be 8 years later that they would fight once more.
Yeah, 8 years on, they had their second meeting. A bit too long for me, for anyone's liking. It would have been great to have had it soon. Obviously, Ray Leonard had the injury, so you got to say it probably would have happened if he hadn't have retired for the time that he did. But yeah, it was at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas once again, and it was a much closer fight. It was a good fight. It's another. End of the day, it's not as good as the first fight. I'm not going to try and butter it up and say that it is, because it wasn't. But it was still a big fight, and it was a closer fight. But Hearns, for me, he probably should have got this. I mean, it was on January 24th, 1989. The promoter Bob Arum as well. He was involved a lot more in this second fight, and the fight was billed as the war. And big money. I mean, Leonard got $13 million, and Hearns got $11 million. Little bit more than they got from the first fight. It it was at a different weight as well. It was for the WBC super middleweight title. And yeah, I don't really know what else to say. It's a good fight to watch. I mean, we can break down some more information for us there, Sean. You can carry that on and just, I don't know if you want to pull off some quotes and stuff, but it just wasn't as good as the first. So we didn't really want to just spend too much time on this, really. Go back and watch it, and we'll recommend it. But the first one's the one to watch, really.
Yeah, exactly. It was for us. It was only really mentioning it as a side factor to it, because really people don't. For me, as a boxing fan, I don't really consider that to be as legitimate and as legendary as this particular one, because they were at the back ends of the careers, weren't they, when you think about it? You know, I know obviously Tommy Hearns, he went on till 1997, but he was in and out of the ring. Sugar Ray Leonard, again, a similar period of time where he was in and out of the ring, and they were just never the same fighters. So it wasn't really about us describing that particular fight, but it's mentioning the fact that if you didn't know that they fought once more, and you're only aware of this particular fight that we've covered, they did fight once more, 1989, super middleweight title on the line. It's not as good as this. Nowhere near as good as this. It's two guys that you look at and you think, fucking hell, they were absolutely fantastic on the day. And looking at them in that fight, it's like you can see how much they've aged and declined as fighters, and as the skill sets are starting to diminish a little bit more. It does make it quite an exciting fight in a lot of respects, because the skill sets are not there. The reaction, the timing, the speed is not there than what it once was for guys like Sugar Ray Leonard and Tommy Hearns. But it's a very, very controversial draw as well. Tommy Hearns should have won it, apparently. To many ringside reporters felt Tommy Hearns should have won the fight, but this episode hasn't been about that. It's been all about the first fight between these two, the tale of Sugar Ray Leonard, Tommy Hearns. What an epic fight, what a legendary night. I've enjoyed covering this one so much, and it's been a great way to add to our tale of the Four Kings. We've done so much on these guys, and this was just another great addition to the series of Legendary Nights.
Yeah, it really has been. I mean, we've done them all pretty much now. I think the only one we haven't done is Hagler Duran. I think and Hearns Duran, which was very short, however it lasted. But that was the one. Obviously, Hearns knocks out Duran. But yeah, and Nomas. I suppose Nomas is the one that we probably would like to go back to. The crazy thing is when you're doing this, obviously we try and intertwine the careers and we try and give you some stories, but you know, it's inevitable you end up repeating some of them because it's just they were just all so close. Like you say, it's just, you know, if not fighting a couple of weeks from each other, maybe in a different city, and then they're in the same city. It's so difficult to try and give you new stories and new stuff. So, you know, it was all about the fight, the build up to it, how it came about. We all know how it came about. We know how successful both these fighters were. For me, at welterweight, I think Leonard would always have the advantage over Tommy Hearns. And Tommy Hearns, you know, splendid fighter he was, great puncher. He gassed, and he just couldn't last those 15 rounds. And those first 5 rounds, just shows you how key it was for Sugar Ray Leonard and how he managed to just be elusive enough so Hearns couldn't catch him when he was at his peak and he was at his best fitness, because he knew if I take him into the trenches in those later stages, I think I've got him, and it worked. Worked like a dream.
Well, one thing I would probably say to our listeners, for guys that maybe have been listening to us for a long time, if you've not already listened to the career profiles of both of these fighters, they are available on the Career Profiles podcast feed. Both Tommy Hearns and both Sugar Ray Leonard are on there, so you can get a lot more insight into their lives, their careers, these fights in particular that we've covered. You can get different stories in there, so please do go and check them out. And if you've enjoyed this episode of Legendary Nights, please do let us know on social media at Legend Night Pod on Twitter, and the Facebook page is the BTR Boxing Podcast Network Facebook page. I just want to say thank you so much to all our patrons who will be listening to this now as part of their early access through the BTR Boxing Podcast Network. Please go and check out the patreon.com/BTR Boxing Podcast Network page. If you do want to become a patron, you do want to support the podcast, and you do want to be able to get access to patron-only episodes, content that doesn't get released anywhere else on our network but there. If you do want to get involved in that aspect of what we do, please do go and check that out as well. Fight fans, it's been an absolute pleasure as always. We do appreciate you listening to all these episodes. The reviews that have been coming in on Apple Podcasts, keep them coming. We absolutely love them. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. This has all been about the tale of Sugar Ray Leonard, versus Tommy Hitman Hearns.